Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku and Spider-Man were forced to battle for New York. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in Muzidafa tasted of ozone and burnt asphalt. It was a flavor Izuku Midoriya had come to associate with victory, or at least the frantic, breathless moments just before it. Below him, the street was a chaotic mosaic of flashing police lights, evacuating civilians, and the jagged, crystalline structures left in the wake of the villain's quirk. "He's cornered Deku!" The voice of his mentor, Endeavor, crackled through his comms, the man's signature gruffness cutting through the static. "West Quadrant, by the old Kibo department store. Do not let him activate that device again." "On it!" Deku yelled back, his voice a breathless gasp. He propelled himself off the rooftop, a burst of green energy flaring around him. One for all thrummed under his skin, a familiar and potent symphony of power. Below, the villain known as Distortion was scrambling over a pile of rubble. He was a wiry man in a cheap tactical vest, his face a mask of panic. His quirk, Fractured Space, allowed him to punch temporary, unstable holes in reality, creating shimmering, razor-sharp portals that could slice through concrete and steel. Deku landed with a ground-shaking thud that cratered the pavement. "It's over! Surrender now!" Distortion spun around, his eyes wide with desperation. In his hand was a briefcase, and attached to it by a series of humming wires was a strange, metallic gauntlet on his arm. It was a quirk amplifier, a black market piece of tech designed to push a user's abilities to catastrophic levels. "Stay back, hero!" the villain shrieked, his voice cracking. "You don't know what this thing does! I can't even control it!" Deku's analytical mind was already cataloging the data. The amplifier was glowing with an unhealthy purple light. The air around it was visibly warping, like heat haze on a summer day, but colder, sharper. This was the source of the chaos. "Then take it off!" Deku reasoned, taking a cautious step forward, his hands held up in a placating gesture. "We can help you." "There is no help!" Distortion screamed, fumbling with the controls on the gauntlet. "They'll throw me in Tartarus! I won't go back!" He slammed his fist into the briefcase. The reaction was instantaneous and horrifying. It wasn't a portal that opened this time, it was a wound. Reality itself seemed to tear open, not with a shimmer, but with a sickening, silent crack, like a pane of glass breaking in a vacuum. A vortex of non-space, a swirling abyss of black and violent violet, began to pull everything inward. Cars, streetlights, and chunks of asphalt were ripped from the ground and consumed. Deku's danger sense, the fourth user's quirk, screamed at him. He anchored himself with Black Whip, tendrils of dark energy lashing out and gripping onto the steel frame of a nearby building. The pull was immense, a physical, hungry force. Then he saw them. A young family, a mother, a father, and a small child in a bright yellow raincoat, had been caught behind the police line. A chunk of flying debris had knocked over their barricade, and now they were stumbling, sliding inexorably toward the maw of the vortex. The mother had her arms wrapped around her child, her face a silent scream of terror. There was no time for a plan. There was no time for analysis. There was only the core, unwavering directive that was the very foundation of his soul: save them. "Float!" he commanded internally. He released his Black Whip anchors, letting the gravitational pull of the anomaly sling him forward. He used FA gene to store kinetic energy, preparing for a single, desperate burst. He was a green comet streaking toward a black hole. He reached the family in a fraction of a second. "Hold on!" he shouted, his voice nearly stolen by the wind. He wrapped them in 3 thick tendrils of Black Whip, the energy constructs warm and solid. With a final, explosive burst of FA gene, he hurled them backward, away from the vortex and into the waiting arms of a pro-hero who had just rounded the corner. He saw the relief on the mother's face. He saw the child's wide, unblinking eyes. He felt a split second of profound, burning satisfaction. It was a fatal miscalculation. The burst of momentum had cost him his own. His trajectory, once a controlled arc, was now a terminal dive straight into the heart of the anomaly. He tried to use float, tried to fire another strand of Black Whip, but it was like trying to swim against a waterfall. The world dissolved around him. The sounds of Muzurifu, the sirens, the shouts, Endeavor's roar of his name, were sheared away, replaced by an unbearable, high-frequency keen that vibrated in his bones. He saw a kaleidoscope of impossible colors, of places and times that weren't his own. A desert with two suns. A city made of gleaming crystal. An ancient, gnarled tree floating in a silver nebula. It was a torrent of information his brain couldn't process, a physical and psychic assault. His suit was being torn. His skin felt like it was peeling away under the pressure. The power of One for All flared wildly, trying to protect him, but it had nothing to push against. He was being unmade. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. There was a final, violent lurch, like being thrown from a speeding train. The universe snapped back into place with the force of a thunderclap. Deku crashed. He hit something hard, flat, and unyielding. The impact rattled every bone in his body, knocking the air from his lungs in a pained, wet whoosh. He skidded for a dozen feet across gritty asphalt, the friction tearing at the already damaged fabric of his costume and the skin beneath. He came to a stop in a heap of tangled limbs and raw pain. For a long moment, there was only the ringing in his ears and the coppery taste of blood in his mouth. He lay there, face down, trying to remember how to breathe. In. Out. His ribs screamed in protest. He pushed himself up onto his elbows, his vision swimming. The first thing he registered was the noise. It was a tidal wave of sound, a cacophony so dense and overwhelming it felt solid. 1,000 car horns blared in a dozen different rhythms. The shriek of sirens was different here, a piercing, two-toned wail that was utterly alien. Music pulsed from unseen sources, a chaotic mix of pounding bass and tinny pop. And the voices. There were so many voices, a roaring flood of languages he didn't understand, layered one on top of the other into an incomprehensible wall of human sound. The second thing was the light. He was surrounded by colossal buildings that scraped the sky, their surfaces plastered with gigantic, luminous screens. They flashed and strobed with an intensity that made his head spin. Images of impossibly beautiful people drinking soda, sleek cars driving on impossible roads, advertisements for movies and shows he'd never heard of. The light was so bright, so relentless, it felt like standing in the heart of a star. He finally managed to push himself to his feet, swaying unsteadily. He was in the center of a vast intersection, a canyon of steel and glass. Yellow cars, longer and boxier than any he'd ever seen, swarmed around him like angry insects. People, a sea of them, more people than he'd ever seen in one place, were staring. They pointed, their faces a mixture of confusion, amusement, and alarm. Some held up small rectangular devices, pointing them at him. "Where?" he rasped, his throat raw. He looked down at himself. His costume was in tatters. The right shoulder was completely gone, revealing the scarred muscle beneath. One of his armored boots was cracked, and his iron-soled shoe was sparking faintly. His mask was gone, and his cowl was torn, letting his messy green hair spill out. He must look like a villain, fresh from a losing battle. Panic, cold and sharp, began to cut through his daze. Is this the villain's quirk? A pocket dimension? Did he trap the whole neighborhood? He scanned the crowd, his eyes darting, looking for a familiar face, a hero uniform, anything. He saw none. The architecture was wrong. The cars were wrong. The people's clothes were different. He reached into a pouch on his belt, his fingers fumbling, and pulled out his provisional hero license. The plastic card felt solid and real in his trembling hand. It was his identity, Izuka Midoriya. Quirk, superpower. He looked at the card, then up at the alien world around him. The card meant nothing here. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't in a pocket dimension. He wasn't in Muzurifu. The villain's quirk hadn't created a space, it had opened a door, and he had fallen through it. Alone, a wave of vertigo washed over him. His heart hammered against his bruised ribs. He was injured, alone, in a place he didn't know, with a power that could level a city block if he lost control. The weight of it was crushing. All Might. Mom. Everyone. He stumbled backward, bumping into the hood of one of the yellow cars. The driver laid on the horn, a long, angry blare that made him flinch. He needed to get out of the street. He needed to find somewhere to think. He needed to be invisible, and in his bright, tattered green costume, he was the least invisible person in the entire city. Just as he was about to make a desperate leap for the nearest rooftop, a new sound cut through the chaos. It wasn't the police. It was the squeal of tires and the heavy thump of metal on metal. Down the street, a large, dark gray armored van had been T-boned by a beat-up flatbed truck. Men in tactical gear and animal-themed masks were piling out, armed with heavy-duty weaponry. One of them, a large, powerfully built man with a stylized ox helmet, ripped the back door off the armored van with his bare hands. Civilians screamed and scattered, creating a new wave of panic that radiated outward from the crash. Deku's training, his very essence, took over. The panic receded, replaced by a cold, clear focus. People were in danger. That was a language he understood. His personal crisis would have to wait. He crouched, the familiar energy of one for all beginning to pool in his legs. He was about to launch himself forward when a flash of red and blue caught his eye. A figure swung into the intersection, moving with an impossible, breathtaking grace. He was a streak of color against the gray buildings, arcing through the air on a silvery white tether that seemed to sprout from his wrist. He twisted midair, flipped, and landed on top of the armored van in a low crouch, every line of his body screaming agility and power. He was lean, wiry, and wore a full-body suit of vibrant red and blue, a black spider emblem emblazoned on his chest. "Morning, boys!" The newcomer's voice was amplified, slightly tinny, but filled with an easy, infuriating confidence. "I see we're going for the early bird gets the worm approach to armed robbery. Points for enthusiasm. But I'm afraid the city's thou shalt not steal big piles of money policy is still in effect. Memo go around?" The man in the ox mask roared and charged, swinging a fist the size of a small ham. The red and blue hero didn't even seem to tense. He simply leaned backward, the punch whistling past his head with millimeters to spare. "Whoa, easy there, Ferdinand," the hero quipped, pushing off his hands and flipping over the charging man's back. While airborne, he fired 2 quick jets of the white substance from his wrists, instantly pinning the ox man's feet to the ground. "Gotta watch that temper. It's bad for your blood pressure." Deku watched, utterly mesmerized. He had never seen anyone move like that. It wasn't like Mirko's powerful leaps or Gran Torino's jet-propelled ricochets. It was a fluid, three-dimensional acrobatics that seemed to defy gravity itself. And the white tethers, were they part of his quirk? Some kind of support gear? His mind was already whirring, muttering unconsciously. Incredible agility seems to be his primary asset. The webs provide unparalleled mobility in an urban environment. Range appears to be significant. Strength of the tensile compound must be insane to support his weight during swings. And that dodge, it wasn't just reflex. He moved before the punch was even fully thrown. Some kind of precognitive ability? A danger sense? Another of the robbers, a man in a sharp suit and a fedora, uncoiled a high-tech lasso that crackled with energy. "Get him, Montana!" Montana swung the lasso. But the hero was already moving, leaping high into the air. "A lasso? Seriously? Are we role-playing? Because I left my chaps at home." "You should have called ahead," he chided, firing a glob of webbing that gummed up the lasso's mechanism. While the hero in red and blue was occupied, the third man, a smaller, quicker fighter in a green suit, slipped past him and grabbed a terrified security guard, pulling him into a headlock. "Don't move, Bug!" the man, Fancy Dan, hissed. That was it. The line was crossed. Deku's hesitation evaporated. A hostage. Unacceptable. He didn't denounce himself. He didn't shout a catchphrase. He just moved. One for all, full cowling, 8%, green lightning crackled around him. To the onlookers he was a blur. To the red and blue hero, whose head suddenly snapped in Deku's direction a split second before he moved, it must have looked like teleportation. Deku appeared beside Fancy Dan, his movement so fast it kicked up a vortex of dust and discarded newspapers. The robber's eyes widened, unable to process the sudden appearance of the green-clad teenager. Deku's hand chopped down, not on the man himself, but on the arm holding the guard. The blow was precise, controlled, but backed by a sliver of one for all's immense power. There was a sickening crack. Fancy Dan screamed and released the guard, clutching his now broken arm. Deku gently pushed the stunned guard away from the fight, toward the relative safety of a storefront. "Stay here," he said in Japanese, forgetting for a moment that it would be gibberish. He turned back to the scene. The Oxman had finally ripped his feet free and was charging again, this time at Deku. The red and blue hero shouted something, a warning, but Deku was already set. He met the charge head-on. Instead of trying to match the man's brute force, he dropped low and drove his shoulder into the man's stomach. It was a perfectly executed martial arts throw, amplified by 8% of the world's strongest quirk. The Oxman, despite outweighing Deku by at least 100 kilograms, was lifted off his feet and slammed onto his back with enough force to crack the asphalt. He lay there, dazed and groaning. Silence. The street, for a single, brief second, was utterly quiet. Even the red and blue hero was momentarily still, perched on a traffic light, his masked lenses wide. Peter Parker had seen a lot. He'd fought aliens on other planets, battled wizards, and punched a literal god in the face. He'd seen a man turn into a giant green rage monster, and another shrink to the size of an ant. But he had never, ever seen anything like the kid in the green bunny suit. 1 second, he was handling the enforcers, a routine Tuesday morning headache. The next, his spider sense didn't just tingle, it screamed. It wasn't the familiar spike of immediate danger, but a deafening, overwhelming roar of pure, unadulterated power suddenly entering the battlefield. It was like a lightning strike in a clear blue sky, and then the kid was there. He moved with a speed that made Quicksilver look like he was jogging. The force he'd used to take down Ox wasn't just strength, it felt different. It was an explosive release of energy, accompanied by a flash of green light and a sound like a miniature thunderclap. Peter's suit sensors were going haywire, trying to classify the energy signature and coming up with nothing. Not mutant. Not inhuman. Not mystic. Something else. "Okay," Spider-Man said, his voice a little less confident than before. "New player has entered the game. Nice shot, Greenbean. You on our side?" Deku just looked at him, his expression intense, his brow furrowed in concentration. He didn't seem to understand. "Right, language barrier." "Great." Montana, recovering from his surprise, took advantage of the pause. He flicked his wrist, and his lasso, now free of the webbing, snaked out not toward Spider-Man, but toward the down briefcase full of money. "Not so fast, Tex!" Spider-Man yelled, leaping off the traffic light. But Deku was faster. He saw the lasso's trajectory and reacted. He raised a hand, fingers splayed. St. Louis smash! He didn't even make contact. He swung his arm in a wide arc, unleashing a controlled burst of air pressure from his hand. The blast of wind hit the lasso mid-flight, sending it spinning harmlessly off course. At the same time, it kicked up a cloud of street dust, momentarily blinding Montana. Peter landed next to Deku, his mind reeling. He controls their pressure too? Speed, strength, and wind powers? What is this kid, a one-man Avengers team? There was a moment of unspoken communication. Deku looked at Spider-Man, then at Montana, and then back. He gave a sharp, determined nod. Peter, understanding the universal hero language of "let's finish this," nodded back. It was a symphony of chaos and coordination. Spider-Man shot 2 webs, not at Montana, but at 2 discarded car doors on either side of him. He yanked hard. The heavy metal doors flew inward, slamming into Montana from both sides with a resounding clang. The man crumpled to the ground, trapped between them. Meanwhile, Fancy Dan had recovered enough to pull a pistol. He aimed it squarely at Spider-Man's back. Deku saw it. He didn't have a clear shot. So he created one. A tendril of black whip shot from his arm, more instinct than thought. It wasn't aimed at the man or the gun. It latched onto a nearby mailbox. With a sharp tug, Deku pulled himself sideways, crossing the distance in an instant, and placing himself directly in the line of fire. His armored boot came up, and he kicked the gun from Fancy Dan's hand. It skittered across the pavement. Spider-Man turned, his lenses widening as he saw the black energy whip retract into the kid's arm. "Okay, that's new," Peter muttered to himself. "So we've got speed, strength, wind powers, and some kind of weird symbiote thing? Kid, what did you have for breakfast? Plutonium? He didn't have time to ponder it. He webbed Fancy Dan to the wall of a building, then swung over to the dazed ox, and gave him a similar web-based cocoon for good measure. In less than a minute, the fight was over. The enforcers were neutralized, the money was secure, and the two heroes stood in the middle of the quieted intersection, back to back, surrounded by webbing and cracked pavement. The air was thick with the smell of ozone from Deku's power, and the oddly sweet chemical scent of Peter's web fluid. Police sirens grew louder, finally arriving at the scene. Deku's adrenaline began to fade, replaced by the throbbing pain in his ribs, and the crushing weight of his situation. He looked at the hero beside him. The man was lean, but the way he held himself suggested a dense, wiry strength. His suit was a masterpiece of design, functional and iconic. This was a real hero. A pro. Maybe he could help. Spider-Man turned to face him fully. He tilted his head, the white lenses of his mask narrowing slightly as if he were scanning Deku. So, not from around here, I take it? That outfit is a little loud for the Big Apple. Deku's mind raced, trying to pull up the scattered English lessons from his middle school and high school classes. All Might had always stressed the importance of being able to communicate internationally. He never thought he needed for this. I am hero. Deku managed, the words feeling thick and clumsy in his mouth. He pointed to himself. Hero. Deku. Spider-Man's posture relaxed slightly. A gesture of understanding. A hero? Yeah, I got that part. I'm Spider-Man. He pointed to the spider on his chest. Friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, usually. Welcome to New York. You picked a hell of a day to visit. Before Deku could try to formulate another sentence, a strange thing happened. The police sirens, which had been growing steadily closer, abruptly cut out. The murmuring of the crowd died down. The distant traffic seemed to fall silent. An unnatural quiet descended upon the massive intersection, a quiet so profound it was more unnerving than the previous chaos. Then, every screen in Times Square flickered. The soda ads, the movie trailers, the news tickers, they all glitched, dissolved into static, and then resolved into a single, terrifying image. It was a mask. A smooth, stark white mask, utterly featureless except for two pinpricks of crimson light where the eyes should be. It was cold, and passive, and deeply unsettling. A figure wearing the mask, dressed in a sharp, tailored black suit, appeared on every single screen, from the smallest storefront television to the colossal jumbotrons that towered over them. A voice, smooth as silk and cold as the grave, echoed from every speaker in the square, amplified to be heard for blocks. It was calm, cultured, and utterly devoid of emotion. An impressive performance. The voice began, a chillingly conversational tone. Raw, untamed power clashing with nimble, seasoned experience. Strength versus agility. The symbol of tomorrow versus the stalwart of today. It was a truly spectacular audition. Deku and Spider-Man both looked up, their bodies tensing. This was wrong. This was a villain takeover on a scale Peter hadn't seen since Mysterio, but it felt colder, more controlled. Audition? Spider-Man called out, his voice tight. What are you talking about? Who are you? The masked figure on the screen seemed to smile, though his mask didn't move. Who I am is irrelevant. I am merely the host. The proctor. You may call me the Game Master. The crimson lights in the mask seemed to flare. And as for the audition? You both passed. With flying colors. You have proven yourselves to be the premier heroes of your respective worlds, the perfect candidates for my little experiment. A low hum began to fill the air. A shimmering, translucent barrier of golden energy flickered into existence at the edges of the intersection, then expanded outward, racing down the avenues and streets, climbing the sides of the skyscrapers. I have sealed the island of Manhattan from the outside world, the Game Master announced, his voice retaining its placid calm. No one gets in, and no one gets out. I have also taken the liberty of placing a series of quantum-entangled explosives in key locations across the city. Hospitals. Schools. Subway hubs. Nasty business. A cold dread, far worse than anything he'd felt in the vortex, washed over Deku. This was a nightmare. What do you want? Peter yelled, his fists clenched. The Game Master's crimson eyes on the screen seemed to fixate on the two of them. What I want is an answer to a very old question. What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? What happens when two paragons of virtue, two selfless champions, are forced into a corner? Will their ideals hold? Or will they, like all creatures, revert to their most basic instinct, survival? The screens all changed, now displaying a live feed of Deku and Spider-Man standing in the street, a grim close-up of their shocked faces. The rules are simple. The Game Master continued, his voice echoing across the now silent city. You two will fight. The city is your arena. Convince me that you are truly trying to defeat your opponent. If you fail to entertain me, if you hold back, if you try to work together, a bomb detonates. A hospital vanishes. A subway train is atomized. The only way to disarm the network and free this city is for one of you to unequivocally defeat the other. To prove yourself the superior hero. He paused, letting the horror of his proclamation sink in. The silence was absolute. The fate of 8 million people rests in your hands. So tell me, heroes, which of you is willing to sacrifice the other to save them all? The Game Master's image faded, replaced by a simple, stark message displayed on every screen, in every language, burning itself into the eyes of every citizen and the hearts of the two heroes trapped at the center of it all. Let the game begin. The words pulsed, a slow, rhythmic heartbeat of doom. Below them, in a smaller font, a timer appeared, counting down from 1 hour. Deku looked from the terrifying message to the hero in red and blue beside him. The man's relaxed posture was gone, replaced by a rigid tension that spoke of barely contained fury. The lenses of his mask, which had seemed so expressive and friendly moments before, were now cold and opaque. They were no longer potential allies. They were no longer fellow heroes. They were opponents. Contestants. And the prize for winning was the survival of New York. The Game Master's final, chilling words echoed in the canyons of steel and glass, a death sentence for one of them and a question that would tear their souls apart. Welcome, contestants, to the battle for New York. The timer on the giant screens pulsed. 59:59. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. The surreal silence of Times Square was absolute, a vacuum where a hurricane of noise had just been. 8 million people, trapped on their island, stared at screens displaying the faces of two costumed strangers and a countdown clock that was ticking away the last hour of their normalcy. Then the silence broke. It wasn't a gradual return of sound, it was a shatter. A collective, citywide scream of terror and confusion. The crowd in the square, which had been a sea of curious onlookers, became a panicked mob. People scrambled, pushing and shoving, trying to run in every direction at once, their faces masks of primal fear. They were rats in a cage who had just seen the scientist's scalpel. Deku flinched, the wave of panic hitting him like a physical force. His instinct was to help, to create order, to calm them down, but his mind was a maelstrom. Explosives. Hospitals. Schools. Fight him. Defeat him. The Game Master's words echoed, a venomous litany overriding his heroic imperatives. How could he save a crowd when he was being ordered to fight the only other hero in sight? Hey! Green Bean! Eyes on me! The voice was sharp, cutting through his spiraling thoughts. Spider-Man grabbed his shoulder, the grip surprisingly strong, anchoring him. We gotta move! Now! Spider-Man shouted over the growing din. The police, finally spurred to action, were trying to form lines, but it was like trying to dam a flood with their bare hands. Where? Deku started, his English failing him. No time! Just hold on. Spider-Man didn't wait for an answer. He aimed one arm at the skyscraping corner of a nearby building. With a loud thwip, a thick, white strand shot out, sticking to the concrete with an audible thwack. Before Deku could fully process what was happening, Spider-Man's other arm wrapped around his waist, lifting him off his feet as if he weighed nothing. Hold on tight! Was the only warning he got. The ground vanished. Deku's stomach lurched into his throat as they were yanked violently into the air. The sensation was utterly disorienting. It wasn't like float, which offered a gentle, controlled buoyancy. It was a gut-wrenching, pendulum swing, a fall and a catch repeated over and over. The wind roared past his ears, whipping his torn cowl. The city became a dizzying blur of yellow cabs, terrified people, and towering glass canyons. He instinctively clenched his fists, the green sparks of one for all flickering around him in his distress. "Whoa, easy there, Sparky!" Spider-Man grunted, the muscles in his arms straining. "Whatever that green lightning thing is, try not to do it while I'm carrying you. I don't want to find out if this suit is lightning-proof the hard way." They swung high above the chaos, a two-person trapeze act in a circus of fear. Deku forced himself to look down. The scale of it was breathtaking and horrifying. The panic was spreading like a virus through the city's arteries. He could see cars crashing as people abandoned them to flee on foot. He could see the bridges, the city's lifelines, choked with a gridlock of vehicles whose drivers were just now realizing the golden energy barrier was real and impassable. Spider-Man was a master of this environment. He moved with a practiced, fluid grace, using their momentum to carry them from one swing to the next. He wasn't just swinging, he was navigating, his head constantly turning, assessing routes, avoiding obstacles. He was utterly in his element, a stark contrast to Deku, who felt like a clumsy, terrified passenger. After a series of powerful swings that carried them a dozen blocks in under a minute, Spider-Man angled their descent. They landed on a flat, gravel-covered rooftop, hidden from the street by a large water tower. He set Deku down gently. The instant his feet were on solid ground, Deku stumbled to his knees, gasping, the vertigo from the swing compounding his panic. "Sorry about the rough ride," Spider-Man said, his voice still a little breathless. He walked to the edge of the roof, peering down at the chaos below. "No other way to get out of that mess clean." Deku took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to steady his heart rate. "Thank you," he managed, the English words feeling foreign and inadequate. He pushed himself up, his legs still shaky. Spider-Man turned back to him, his posture all business. The white lenses of his mask seemed to narrow. "Right. Let's get a few things straight. Who are you? Where did you come from? And what was that light show back there?" Deku opened his mouth to try and explain, to string together the broken English words for quirk and different world, but before he could speak, a voice filled the air around them. It wasn't coming from a speaker. It was coming from everywhere. "A wise decision to seek privacy," the Game Master's voice purred. It was no longer a public broadcast but a direct, intimate transmission, as if he were standing right between them. It wouldn't do for the contestants to be distracted by the screaming masses. "All that matters now is the two of you." Spider-Man immediately went on the defensive, dropping into a low crouch. "He's in our comms," he hissed, tapping the side of his mask. "Stark's encryption is military grade." "How is he?" "Oh, please. Your Stark technology is clever, for a provincial little world like this one," the Game Master said with dismissive amusement. "But my methods are somewhat more advanced. I am not in your communications network, Spider-Man. I am in the very air you breathe. I am a ghost in your machine. And in yours, too, visitor." Deku felt a strange tingling at his ear, where his own comm device sat. A flicker of static, and then the Game Master's voice was inside his head, speaking perfect, fluent Japanese. "Is that better, Izuku Midoriya? I do so prefer for my players to understand the gravity of their situation." The sound of his own name, spoken in his own language by this monster, sent a spear of ice through Deku's heart. He staggered back, his eyes wide with horror. How do you know my name?" Spider-Man looked at him, then back at the empty air. "What did he say?" "I know everything about you, young hero," the Game Master continued in Japanese, his voice a venomous whisper in Deku's mind. "I know about One for All. I know about All Might, the fading ember you so desperately wish to reignite. I know about your dear mother Inko, who is probably, at this very moment, watching the news reports from Muzurifu about your heroic, and final, act of sacrifice. Tragic." The words were scalpels, expertly dissecting his soul. The mention of his mother made his blood run cold. He felt sick. "Leave her out of this!" Deku snarled, his fists clenching so hard his knuckles turned white. The green sparks of One for All danced erratically across his skin. "But she is the very heart of this, is she not? The motivation. Just as this city is the heart of Peter Parker's conflict." The voice switched, its chilling tone now resonating from Spider-Man's mask. "Let's review the rules, shall we? To ensure there are no misunderstandings." An image shimmered into existence in the air between them. It was a holographic projection of the island of Manhattan, a beautiful and terrifyingly detailed 3D map. Dozens of red dots pulsed on the map, scattered across its length and breadth. "These," the Game Master said, as the map zoomed in on a location Deku recognized from movies, a hospital, Mount Sinai, "are my little incentives. Quantum entangled explosives. A hobby of mine. They don't detonate with fire and shrapnel. That's so messy. No, these devices work by collapsing the space they occupy into a pocket singularity. One moment, a hospital is there. The next, a perfectly spherical crater of nothingness. No rubble. No dust. Just gone. Clean. Efficient." The red dot on the hospital pulsed ominously. "You are my detonator heroes. I have linked the explosives to a sophisticated network of biomonitors. I'm reading your heart rates, your adrenaline levels, your neural activity. I'm even monitoring the cellular decay of your costume's microfibers. I will know if you are truly fighting." Spider-Man stood rigid, his silence more damning than any shout. Deku could feel the rage radiating off him. "The game is divided into rounds. The timer you see is for round 1. When it reaches 0, I will review the combat data from the preceding hour. If I judge that a sufficient level of conflict has occurred, if one of you has established a clear, physical dominance over the other, even temporarily, then the round concludes, and the timer resets. If, however, I detect collusion, if you are pulling your punches, if you spend your time trying to find me instead of fighting each other." The Game Master let the threat hang in the air. Then he sighed, a sound of theatrical disappointment. "You know, I find that a practical demonstration is always more effective than a verbal warning." The holographic map shifted, zooming in on a series of long piers on the west side of the city. A large, derelict brick warehouse on Pier 54 was highlighted. "Watch closely," the Game Master whispered. Even from their rooftop vantage point miles away, they could see it. Or rather, they could see what happened where it used to be. There was no explosion. No fireball. No sound. One instant, the long, dilapidated warehouse stood silhouetted against the Hudson River. The next, it was simply gone. It didn't crumble or fall. It folded in on itself, collapsing into a point of nothingness with a faint, sickening visual shimmer, like a soap bubble popping. Where the building had stood, there was now just the empty wooden pier and the gray water of the river beyond. A perfect, building-sized chunk of reality had been surgically erased. Deku stared, his mouth agape. The sheer, clean wrongness of it was more terrifying than any explosion he had ever witnessed. It was a violation of physics, a quiet apocalypse on a small scale. "That was a warning," the Game Master's voice returned, laced with a smug satisfaction. "A free demonstration. The next one will not be an empty building. Do I make myself clear?" The holographic map vanished. The voice in their heads fell silent. They were alone again on the rooftop, the silence broken only by the distant, echoing sirens of a city in the grip of panic. The timer on the invisible screen in Deku's mind's eye read, 51:17. For a full minute neither of them moved. Deku was trying to process the impossible, his mind frantically trying to find a flaw, a loophole, a weakness. Quantum entangled explosives? Pocket singularities? Is that a quirk? Or technology? If it's tech, there has to be a source, a broadcast signal. But he said he was in the air itself. How do you fight that? How do you fight the rules of physics being rewritten? Finally, Spider-Man moved. He straightened up from his tense crouch and let out a long, slow breath. It was a sound of profound fury and exhaustion. He turned to Deku. "Okay," he said, his voice dangerously low. "New plan." He tapped a sequence on a gauntlet on his wrist. A faint blue light shimmered over his mask's lenses. Suit, activate universal translator. Bidirectional. Prioritize syntax and idiomatic conversion. Japanese. A synthesized, calm female voice responded from his suit, audible to both of them. Universal translator activated. Language, Japanese. Spider-Man looked at Deku. When he spoke again, the words that came out of his mouth were English, but the sound that reached Deku's ears was perfect, unaccented Japanese, albeit with the slightly sterile, robotic timbre of a translation program. "Can you understand me now, kid?" Deku nodded slowly, stunned. "Yes. Your suit, it's a long story. We don't have time for it." Spider-Man cut him off, his tone sharp. He began to pace back and forth along the edge of the roof, a caged tiger. "His name is Izuku Midoriya. You have a power called a quirk. One for all. You're not from here. Not even from this dimension. Is that right?" Deku was taken aback. "How did you?" "He told you, he didn't have to. He was talking to you in Japanese a minute ago. And he called this a provincial little world, singular. He mentioned your world and my world. It's not a big leap," Peter said, his mind clearly working at a furious pace. "So, you're an alien basically." "I'm not an alien," Deku protested, a flash of indignation cutting through his fear. "I'm human. My world is just different. We have quirks. Superpowers. It's a society of heroes. A society of heroes," Spider-Man repeated, the translator giving the phrase a flat, cynical edge. "Must be nice. Here, we get a handful of good guys, a couple of billionaire philanthropists in metal suits, and a whole lot of crazy. And now we've got him." He stopped pacing and jabbed a finger toward the sky. The Game Master, he fell silent for a moment, looking out over his city. The golden dome of the energy barrier was now fully visible, a shimmering, beautiful cage trapping millions of terrified souls. "This is my home," Spider-Man said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, filled with a cold, hard rage that was more intimidating than any shout. "My family is down there. My friends. He's turned my city into his personal gladiatorial arena, and he's forcing us to be the star attractions." He turned back to Deku, the white lenses of his mask seeming to bore into him. "So this is how it is, Izuku Midoriya. You are a powerful, idealistic kid who has stumbled into a nightmare, and I am a guy who has been dealing with nightmares in this city for a long, long time." Deku stood his ground, his fears slowly being burned away by a familiar, stubborn fire. The fire All Might had ignited in him. "We can't do what he wants. We can't fight each other. That's not what heroes do. There has to be another way." A harsh, bitter laugh escaped Spider-Man. "Another way? Did you not see what he just did? He erased a building from existence. He's in our heads, he's watching our every move, and he has the whole island wired to blow. There is no other way. There is only the game." "No!" Deku insisted, taking a step forward. "He's trying to break us. He said it himself, to see if our ideals hold. If we fight, we prove him right. We let him win, and if we don't fight, a hospital full of people gets turned into a crater." Peter shot back, his voice rising. He stabbed a finger toward Deku. "You think I want to do this? You think I enjoy the idea of beating up a kid who, 5 minutes ago, helped me save people? I've seen villains like this before. Manipulators. Sadists who get off on forcing people to make impossible choices. And I've learned one thing, you can't reason with them. You can't appeal to their better nature, because they don't have one. You can only beat them." "Then we beat him," Deku argued, his voice ringing with a desperate conviction. "We find him. We work together, and how do we do that?" Spider-Man threw his hands up in exasperation. "He's everywhere and nowhere. He's a ghost in the machine. We have." He checked a timer on his gauntlet. 46 minutes to put on a show for this psychopath, or he starts killing people by the thousands. We don't have time to go on a wild goose chase. We have to try. Deku's voice cracked with emotion. "In my world, the greatest hero, All Might, he always found a way. He smiled in the face of impossible odds to reassure people. He never gave up. Never. To give in and just fight, that would be betraying everything he stood for." "Everything I stand for." Peter stood silently for a long moment, the translated words hanging in the air. The fire in his posture seemed to dim slightly, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. "Kid, you have no idea what you're talking about," he said, his voice soft and heavy with a history Deku couldn't possibly understand. Smiling in the face of impossible odds doesn't stop a bomb from going off. I know you want to save everyone. I get it. Believe me, I get it more than anyone. With great power comes great responsibility. That's my mantra. My curse. I am responsible for this city, and right now, my responsibility is to keep that maniac from erasing a pediatric ward. He took a step closer, his tone becoming less angry and more like a grim teacher. So here's the reality. We have to fight. We have to make it look good. We have to give him the violence he wants, because if we don't, people will die. That is not a theory. It is a fact. Deku stared at him, the horrible, sickening logic of it washing over him. He felt like he was drowning. This cynical, pragmatic hero was wrong. He had to be, but the image of the warehouse vanishing, the pulsing red dots on the map, the timer ticking down in his head, it was all real. His mind, a relentless engine of analysis, started to churn. He began to mutter, the words tumbling out in Japanese, the translator on Spider-Man's suit working to keep up. He wants a show. He's monitoring us for authenticity. But his goal isn't just violence. It's psychological. He wants to prove a point, to break one of us, to make one of us into the winner who sacrificed the other, a hollow victory. The game isn't the fight itself. The game is the choice. The corruption of a hero's soul is the prize. Spider-Man tilted his head, listening to the rapid-fire analysis. A flicker of something, surprise? Respect, flashed in his posture. Keep going, he said quietly. Deku looked up, snapping out of his muttering trance. He wants a performance. He wants a narrative. A strong hero beating a weak one. A decisive victory. He looked at Spider-Man, a wild, desperate idea beginning to form. So, what if we give him one? On our terms. Peter's lenses widened slightly. What are you talking about? We fight, Deku said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. We fight, and we make it look convincing. We have to. But we control it. We make it a performance, just like he wants, but while we're fighting, we're secretly working. We're gathering information. Looking for a signal. A weakness. Anything. Peter crossed his arms, considering it. The practicality of the idea appealed to his strategic mind. It was a lie, a deception, a gambit. It was a Spider-Man plan. Give him a show to keep him from pushing the button, while we work the real problem behind the curtain. He mused. It's risky. He said he's monitoring everything. He might see through it. We have to make it real enough that he won't. Deku insisted. We have to actually hurt each other. The admission was a physical pain, but we also have to hold back enough not to permanently injure each other. It's a thin line, the thinnest. Peter agreed, his voice grim. And what about the winner part? At the end of each round, he needs a victor. Deku swallowed hard. Then one of us has to lose. The words hung between them, heavy and terrible. Peter looked at Deku, really looked at him. The kid was trembling, but his eyes were filled with a fierce, unwavering resolve. He was terrified, out of his depth, and a million miles from home, but he was still trying to find the heroic path, even if it led through hell. In that moment, Peter didn't just see a powerful anomaly, he saw a kindred spirit. A younger, more hopeful, more breakable version of himself. Damn it, Peter thought. I was actually starting to like him. All right, kid, he sighed, the decision made. All right. We'll try it your way. We'll play his game, but we'll write our own script. He pointed a finger at Deku. But you listen to me. I lead. This is my city, I know its every corner. I know how to sell a fight without bringing a building down by accident. You have too much power and not enough control. That green lightning stuff, you gotta keep it on a leash. You understand? Deku nodded, a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled his knees. They weren't enemies. Not yet. They were allies in the most desperate sense of the word. I understand. I can regulate my output, from 1% to more. I'll keep it low. Good. Spider-Man's tone became brisk, all business once more. The timer is at 39 minutes. He's going to expect the action to start soon. He'll likely designate an arena for the first round to make it more dramatic. As if on cue, the Game Master's voice returned, no longer in their heads, but booming from the sky itself. Round 1 will commence in 10 minutes. The holographic map of Manhattan reappeared, this time highlighting a massive green space in the center of the island. Arena, Central Park. The Great Lawn. The voice was filled with theatrical relish. I trust you will not be late. The audience is waiting. The voice and the map vanished. 10 minutes. Spider-Man and Deku looked at each other. The temporary reprieve was over. Their desperate alliance was about to be put to the most brutal test imaginable. Central Park, Peter said, his voice a low growl. He wants a classic, open-field hero brawl. He's a real showman. He flexed his hands. Okay, Izuku Midoriya. Let's go over the choreography. It's time to put on a show. The 10-minute countdown was the longest and shortest of Izuku Midoriya's life. Each second stretched into an eternity of dread, yet the minutes evaporated with terrifying speed. There was no more time for debate, no more room for desperate hope. There was only the plan, fragile and horrifying as it was. All right, up and at 'em, Greenbean, Spider-Man said, his voice stripped of all its earlier bravado, leaving behind a core of hardened steel. Showtime. He sprinted toward the edge of the rooftop and launched himself into the abyss without a hint of hesitation. A thwip echoed in the concrete canyon, and he was gone, a red and blue pendulum swinging toward the heart of the island. Deku watched him go for a split second, his own heart a frantic drum against his bruised ribs. Choreography, he told himself, the word feeling absurd. This isn't a school festival performance. This is... He couldn't finish the thought. One for all, full cowling, 5%. He kept the output deliberately low, a gentle simmer of power. Green lightning, faint as static, danced around him. He took a running leap from the rooftop, soaring across the street in a graceful arc. He landed silently on the next building over, rolling to absorb the impact. It was less efficient than Spider-Man's swinging, but it was quieter, more controlled. He could keep pace. They moved across the city in a strange, silent tandem. Spider-Man would swing, a vibrant, fluid streak against the sky, while Deku became a flickering green shadow, bounding from rooftop to rooftop. Below them, the city was a portrait of contained panic. The initial wave of terror had subsided into a tense, citywide lockdown. Streets were eerily empty, save for police cars forming barricades at a distance, their lights flashing impotently against the unyielding golden dome. From apartment windows and storefronts, thousands of faces watched, their eyes glued to the sky, looking for the two figures who now held their fate. As they moved, Spider-Man's voice, filtered through the translator, came through Deku's calm. Rule number 1, no killing blows. Not even close. You aim for my shoulders, my legs. Places I can roll with. You hear me? I would never. Deku began, horrified. I know you wouldn't. But your power, it's like a sledgehammer, kid. Even a tap can shatter bone. You need to focus on the shockwaves. The air pressure. Make the environment the victim, not me. Deku landed on a water tower, his breath misting in the cooling air. And you? Your webs, non-lethal by design, Peter replied, swinging in a wide arc around a skyscraper. I'll use impact webbing. Feels like getting hit by a sack of wet cement, but it won't kill you. I'll be trying to immobilize you, restrain you. Your job is to break out, make it look like a struggle. Make it look like you're too strong to be contained. A monster, Deku whispered, the word tasting like poison. There was a pause in the comms. Peter's next swing was tighter, faster. No. A hero, doing what he has to. There's a difference. Remember that. They reached the edge of the park. From above, it was a vast rectangle of darkness carved out of the city's glittering grid. As they descended, the scale of their arena became apparent. The great lawn was a massive, empty expanse of manicured grass, bordered by trees whose leaves rustled in an unnatural silence. The usual sounds of the city, the traffic, the distant sirens, the lifeblood of millions, were gone, replaced by an unnerving quiet. It felt less like a park and more like a sacrificial altar. They landed 60 feet apart on the damp grass, the ground soft beneath their feet. The air was cool and smelled of chlorophyll and impending doom. High above, A single police helicopter hovered just outside the park's airspace, its spotlight sweeping across the lawn, illuminating them like two actors on a stage. They were the only two moving things in a world holding its breath. The players are in position. The Game Master's voice boomed from the sky, a theater owner announcing the main event. The stage is set. Let the curtain rise. A colossal timer materialized in the sky above them, a holographic projection of shimmering crimson numbers. 5 o'clock. Deku realized with a jolt that the 10-minute grace period was over. The game had already begun. Ready or not? Spider-Man muttered, his voice low. He bounced on the balls of his feet, settling into a familiar combat stance. Give me a big, flashy opening. Something to get his attention. Aim for the sky. Deku took a deep, shaky breath, channeling the image of All Might from his debut video, smiling, fearless, a pillar of hope. But no smile came. His face felt like a stone mask. He crouched low, green energy flaring around him, brighter this time. Detroit. Smash! He roared, the name of the move feeling like a blasphemy. He punched upward, not at Spider-Man, but at the empty air. He kept his output at a controlled 8%, but channeled it into a pure pressure wave. A miniature cyclone erupted from his fist, screaming into the sky. It tore through the lower branches of the trees at the edge of the lawn, sending a shower of leaves and twigs into the air. The police helicopter was buffeted violently, forced to pull back. The sound was a sharp, contained thunderclap that echoed across the silent park. It was pure sound and fury, signifying nothing. Spider-Man whistled, a genuine note of surprise in the sound. Okay, that's an attention-getter. My turn! He leaped, impossibly high and fast, firing 2 web lines not at Deku, but at 2 large oak trees flanking him. Using them as anchor points, he slingshot himself forward, a human cannonball. Coming in hot, he yelled for the benefit of their audience. Deku braced himself. Peter had told him what to expect. Sell the impact. Spider-Man didn't hit him. He twisted in midair, his feet lashing out, but he deliberately angled them to miss by a few inches. Deku, as rehearsed, threw himself backward as if struck, rolling across the grass and coming up in a crouch. It felt clumsy, theatrical, fake. You're fast! Deku yelled, playing his part. But not fast enough. He launched himself forward, a green blur. He threw a punch, aiming for the space just to the left of Spider-Man's head. Peter's spider sense must have given him a half-second warning of the punch's trajectory, because he leaned away from it with a dancer's grace, the wind from Deku's fist rustling his suit. Whoa, watch the hair! I don't actually have any, but it's the principle of the thing, Spider-Man quipped, his voice strained. The banter felt hollow, a ghost of his usual wit. He backflipped away, and while upside down, fired a volley of web bullets. Deku raised his arms, letting the sticky white projectiles splat against his gauntlets. They weren't painful, but they were incredibly adhesive, instantly hardening. He grunted, feigning difficulty as he ripped his arms apart, the webbing stretching and snapping with a theatrical thwung. Is that all you have? Deku shouted. Hardly! Spider-Man retorted. He landed and slapped his palms on the ground. A web blossom erupted, thick strands of webbing shooting out in all directions, designed to trap Deku's feet. This was Deku's cue. He stomped down hard. Air force. A localized blast of air pressure from the sole of his boot shredded the incoming webs before they could even touch him, kicking up a circle of dirt and grass. It was a perfect defensive maneuver that looked like an explosive display of raw power. They fell into a rhythm, a deadly, reluctant dance under the cold eye of the helicopter spotlight. Deku would charge, his fists crackling with green energy, delivering smashes that would pulverize the ground inches from where Spider-Man stood. He'd use Black Whip, sending dark tendrils lashing out, only for Spider-Man to evade them with breathtaking aerial acrobatics, the black energy whips cracking like thunder in the empty air. Spider-Man, in turn, used his entire arsenal of non-lethal tricks. He created intricate web nets that Deku would tear through like paper. He used his web lines to pull lampposts and park benches into Deku's path, forcing the boy to either dodge or smash through them, adding to the visual chaos. To your left! Peter whispered under the cover of a loud grunt as he dodged another ground-shattering punch. There's a boulder. Use it. Deku saw it, a large, decorative rock part of the park's landscaping. He grabbed it, the stone groaning in protest as he ripped it from the earth. It was heavy, easily a ton, but with one for all, it felt like styrofoam. He roared and hurled it, putting just enough spin on it so it would fly over Spider-Man's head. Peter didn't even flinch. He let it soar past him and then, with casual ease, shot a web line at it, attached another to a tree, and created a makeshift wrecking ball, swinging the massive rock back toward Deku. It was a brilliant, flashy, and utterly harmless exchange. Theatrics at its finest. They were two masters of their craft, using their incredible powers not to harm, but to create an illusion of deadly combat. To any outside observer, it was a battle of titans, a whirlwind of green energy and white webbing, of impossible strength versus impossible agility. But to Deku, it felt like a lie. Every pulled punch, every dramatic roar, was a betrayal of his ideals. He was a hero. He saved people. He didn't participate in sadistic blood sports, even fake ones. The strain was beginning to show. His movements became a fraction slower, his feigned attacks less convincing, and the game master noticed. The timer in the sky had just passed the halfway mark when his voice, dripping with boredom and contempt, washed over the park. Pathetic. Both heroes froze mid-action. Deku was crouched, ready to spring. Spider-Man was perched on the swinging boulder, a spider on its throne. Did you really think I would be so easily fooled? The game master sneered. His voice was no longer that of a showman, but of a disappointed teacher scolding errant children. This is not a dance recital. This is not a choreographed stunt show. This is a test. A test you are spectacularly failing. A cold dread trickled down Deku's spine. He knows. I require authenticity. I require intent. The voice continued, growing colder. You are holding back. You are conspiring. You are treating me like a fool. And that is an insult I cannot abide. Spider-Man leaped off the boulder, landing softly on the grass. We're fighting! He yelled at the sky. What more do you want? I want you to mean it. The game master whispered, the sound as intimate as a blade at their throats. I want to feel your desperation. I want to see the fear in your eyes when you realize only one of you can walk away. You have attempted to cheat my game. And for that, there must be a punishment. Deku's blood ran cold. No, let this be a lesson in consequences. The holographic map of Manhattan reappeared in the sky, a single building highlighted on the western edge of the park, on Central Park West. It was a pre-war luxury apartment building, its facade ornate and proud. There was no sound. No warning. The top 5 floors of the building simply imploded. The beautiful stonework, the elegant windows, the lives and homes within, they didn't explode outward. They collapsed inward, folding into a point of absolute nothingness with that same sickening, silent shimmer they had seen at the warehouse. A perfect, 5-story bite had been taken out of the building, leaving the lower floors intact but exposing apartments and rooms to the night air like a gruesome dollhouse. The silence that followed was broken a second later by a new sound. The sound of 1,000 windows shattering from the atmospheric pressure change. And then, the screams. Not the panic shrieks of a mob, but the high, piercing screams of genuine, personal terror from the surrounding buildings. Deku stared, his body locked in place. He couldn't breathe. People had been in there. Families sleeping in their beds. He had seen the lights in the windows. They were gone. Erased. Because he had hesitated. Because he had tried to be a hero the only way he knew how. The weight of it was a physical thing, crushing him, stealing the air from his lungs. His vision swam. The screams from the city were a chorus of accusation. No, 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 no. He stammered, shaking his head, his mind refusing to accept what he had just seen. Spider-Man was rigid, his fists clenched at his sides, his whole body vibrating with a silent, incandescent rage. The red of his suit seemed to darken in the spotlight. He was staring at the mangled building, at the hole in his city's heart. You see? Peter's voice was a ragged, broken thing, all the air and life gone out of it. The translator rendered it flat, but the raw anguish beneath was unmistakable. You see what happens when we play games? When we try to be clever? He turned to face Deku, and though the mask hid his face, the agony was plain in his posture. "This is on us. This is our fault. We did this. I thought." Deku's voice was a choked whisper. "You thought wrong!" Peter roared, the sound ripping from his chest, raw and full of pain. He took a step toward Deku, his hand jabbing toward the mutilated building. "Idealism doesn't work here, kid! Hope is a liability. All your talk of symbols of peace and saving everyone, look what it got us. A chunk of my city is gone. People are dead. Because you didn't have the stomach to do what was necessary." The words were hammer blows. Each one struck Deku harder than any physical attack. He knew, on some level, that Peter was lashing out from his own grief and fury. But he also knew, on a deeper, more terrible level, that he was right. Deku's plan. His failure. His fault. The Game Master's voice returned, smooth and satisfied. "A valuable lesson. I hope you were paying attention. The timer is reset. 1 hour. I expect a much more convincing performance this time. Do not disappoint me again." The crimson timer reappeared in the sky. 59:59. Peter looked from the timer back to Deku. The anguish in his posture was slowly being replaced by a cold, hard resolve. A terrible understanding passed between them. The gambit had failed. The performance was over. "There's only one way," Peter said, his voice dangerously quiet. "He needs to see blood. He needs to see one of us go down. For real." Deku stared at him, his mind reeling. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you have to hit me," Peter said, his voice flat. "And you have to mean it. No more pulled punches. No more air blasts. You have to hit me." "I can't," Deku whispered, shaking his head. Horror and revulsion warred within him. "I won't. I can't control it. I could kill you." "You won't," Peter said with a certainty that was terrifying. "I'm faster than you think. And I can take a punch. But you need to try. He needs to believe it." He took another step closer, his voice dropping, becoming deliberately cruel. "Or are you going to stand there and wait for him to pop another building? Maybe a school this time? Full of kids? Is that what it will take?" Every word was a calculated strike, designed to bypass Deku's idealism and hit the raw nerve of his overwhelming sense of responsibility. "Stop," Deku pleaded, taking a step back. "Your great hero, All Might." Peter pressed on, his voice a venomous taunt. "Do you think he would stand here hesitating? Or would he make the hard choice? He'd understand that sometimes, to save the many, you have to sacrifice the few. Or, in this case, just one. Me." He was pushing every button. He was twisting Deku's own philosophy and using it as a weapon against him. "This is the real world, Izuku Midoriya. This isn't a comic book. In the real world, heroes get their hands dirty. They bleed. They make impossible choices. And right now, the choice is simple. Hit me, or watch another building full of people die." "What's it going to be, hero?" Something inside Deku snapped. It was the screams. It was the gaping hole in the building. It was the weight of his own failure, the crushing guilt, the terror of the ticking clock, and the raw, cutting truth in Peter's words. All of it, the fear, the frustration, the grief, the desperate need to do something, coalesced into a single, explosive point. One for all, which had been a simmering 5%, surged without his conscious command. The green lightning around him erupted, no longer faint static but a roaring aura of power. The grass around his feet was torn from the earth. The air crackled. 15%. "Don't talk about him!" Deku screamed, the sound less a word and more a primal roar of anguish. He lunged. It wasn't a calculated move. It was pure, unadulterated reaction. He closed the distance between them in a nanosecond, his body a conduit for the raging power within him. He brought his hand up, fingers splayed, not for a punch but for a flick. A more focused, more controlled, but no less devastating release of power. Delaware smash. Peter's spider sense must have been a deafening siren in his skull. In the split second before the impact he moved. It wasn't a dodge. There was no time to dodge. It was a shift. He twisted his torso, a desperate, instinctual movement to turn a direct blow into a glancing one. Deku's fingers sliced through the air, aimed for the center of Peter's chest. The shockwave, a solid wall of kinetic force, erupted from his hand. It caught Peter across his left side, from his ribs to his shoulder. The sound was not a thunderclap. It was a wet, sickening thump, like a wrecking ball hitting a side of beef. The force of the 15% smash, even as a glancing blow, was catastrophic. Peter was lifted off his feet and thrown backward as if he'd been hit by a truck. He didn't fly. He was hurled, a limp ragdoll of red and blue. He traveled a full 30 feet through the air before crashing, with sickening force, into the trunk of a massive, ancient oak tree. The impact was brutal. There was a sound like a rifle shot as the thick tree trunk splintered, cracks spiderwebbing up the bark. Peter's body slammed into it, and then dropped to the ground, landing in a crumpled, unnatural heap at its base. He didn't move. The world went silent again. The green aura around Deku vanished, leaving him standing alone in the center of the lawn, his arms still outstretched. He stared at his hand, at the fingers that glowed with a faint, residual green light. The hand that had saved people. The hand that had just struck down an ally. The smell of ozone and shattered wood filled the air. He looked over at the base of the tree. At the still, broken-looking form of Spider-Man. Horror, cold and absolute, washed over him. He felt the bough rise in his throat. "No," he whispered, his voice trembling. "No, what did I do?" A low groan came from the crumpled figure. Peter stirred, pushing himself up with one arm, his body shaking violently. He coughed, a racking, painful sound. He slowly, agonizingly, got to his knees, his head hanging low. He was alive. Deku's legs gave out, and he fell to his own knees on the damp grass, relief and self-loathing warring within him. And from the sky, the Game Master's voice, now filled with a chilling, genuine satisfaction, echoed across the silent park. "Excellent. Now that is a promising start." The Game Master's words of approval echoed in the silent, wounded park, each syllable a drop of acid on Izuku Midoriya's soul. Promising start. The phrase implied a future, a continuation of this horror. It promised more pain, more failure, more blood. His gaze was locked on the crumpled form of Spider-Man, who was now struggling to push himself fully upright against the splintered oak tree. The hero's movements were slow, agonizingly so, each shift sending visible tremors through his body. Deku remained on his knees in the grass, paralyzed by a tidal wave of self-loathing. He could still feel the ghost of the impact in his fingertips, the sickening transfer of kinetic energy into flesh and bone. He had done that. He had wielded one for all, the sacred power meant to save, and used it to break someone. "Get up!" The voice was a raw, strained rasp, filtered through Spider-Man's suit and the translator. It wasn't a command. It was a plea ground out through sheer force of will. "Get up, kid!" Deku's eyes lifted. Spider-Man was on one knee, his other leg splayed out. One arm was braced against the tree, the other hung limply at his side, the shoulder joint at a sickeningly wrong angle. "We can't stay here," Peter grunted, the effort of speaking evident. "The spotlight, he's still watching. We have to get off the stage." The red and blue of his suit seemed muted under the harsh glare of the police helicopter's light, and the pristine black spider emblem on his chest was now marred by a dark, spreading stain of dampness. Deku couldn't tell if it was dirt or blood. He didn't want to know. The shame was a physical weight, but Peter's words were a bucket of ice water. He's still watching. The Game Master was savoring this. Savoring Deku's guilt and Peter's pain. That thought, that realization that their suffering was the villain's entertainment, finally managed to cut through Deku's paralysis. It sparked a tiny, defiant ember of anger in the cold void of his guilt. He forced his trembling legs to obey, pushing himself to his feet. He looked at Peter, then at his own hands, and then back at Peter. I can carry you." A harsh, short laugh that ended in a pained cough was Peter's reply. "No offense, Greenbeam, but I've had enough of your strength for one night. Just help me up. My left arm's on vacation." Deku moved cautiously, as if approaching a frightened animal. He reached out, not with the hand that had struck the blow, but with his other one, and gently took hold of Peter's good arm. The man was trembling, not from cold, but from shock and pain. As Deku helped him to his feet, Peter let out a strangled hiss, his entire body going rigid. Cracked ribs, he gasped, leaning heavily on Deku. Definitely cracked. And the shoulders dislocated. You really don't pull your punches, do you? The words weren't an accusation, just a statement of fact, but they twisted the knife in Deku's gut. I'm sorry, he whispered, the words utterly inadequate. I'm so sorry. Later, Peter grunted, pushing himself off Deku slightly to stand, albeit unsteadily, on his own. We need to get into the trees. Out of sight. He stumbled forward, his right arm shooting out a web line to a low-hanging branch. He pulled, but the movement was clumsy, and his swing was a short, jarring arc that ended with him landing badly, his legs buckling. Deku was at his side in an instant. This wasn't working. Peter couldn't travel like this, and Deku couldn't let him. Let me, Deku said, his voice firmer now. He wasn't asking. He activated float, a gentle cushion of energy lifting him a few inches off the ground. He then carefully wrapped his arms around Peter's torso, making sure to avoid the injured left side. Hold on. I won't drop you. Peter tensed, clearly hating the feeling of helplessness, but he was too injured to protest. He gave a sharp, defeated nod. Just try not to hit any branches. With a gentle surge of power, Deku lifted them into the canopy of the park. He kept his movements slow and steady, using float to drift through the dense maze of leaves and branches, black whip tendrils occasionally lashing out to stabilize them or pull them through a particularly tight gap. It was a stark contrast to their earlier frantic journey. This was a somber, silent procession through the darkness. Peter, leaning against Deku's chest, acted as navigator. There's a service entrance, 34th and Dyer, leads to an old maintenance tunnel. He directed in short, breathy sentences. From there, we can get to the west side. I have a place. They moved like ghosts through the massive park, the sounds of the city muted by the thick foliage. Below, they could see the flashing lights of emergency vehicles congregating near the damaged apartment building, a grim reminder of their failure. Every flicker of red and blue light was a fresh stab of guilt for Deku. They finally reached the edge of the park and slipped into the shadows of the towering buildings. Peter guided him to an unmarked, rusted steel door set into a stone retaining wall. A quick manipulation of the lock with a piece of high-tech metal from his gauntlet, and they were inside. The air was cool and damp, smelling of old concrete and stagnant water. A single, bare bulb cast a weak yellow light down a narrow corridor. Peter leaned against the wall, his breath hitching. The adrenaline was clearly wearing off, leaving pure, unadulterated pain in its wake. This way, he rasped, leading Deku through a labyrinth of forgotten tunnels beneath the city streets. It was a hidden world Deku never could have imagined, a network of passages that smelled of history and neglect. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged through a similar door into a dark alleyway. Peter led him down the alley, through the back entrance of a quiet, unassuming brick building. A simple sign by the door read FESD in faded letters. It's a shelter, Peter explained, his voice low as he keyed in a code to bypass the alarm. Food, emergency aid, shelter training. It's a good place. Closed for the night. We'll be safe here. No cameras the game master can easily hack. He led Deku through a silent dining hall filled with empty tables and chairs, and into a large, industrial kitchen. The room was filled with the faint, pleasant smell of baked bread and soup. It was a place of warmth and sanctuary, and its peacefulness made the violence of the past hour feel even more obscene. Peter slumped onto a stool at a steel prep table, his whole body slumping with exhaustion and pain. Okay, he sighed. Okay. We're safe. For now. He reached up with his good hand and pulled his mask off, dropping it onto the table. Deku stared. He hadn't known what to expect. A grizzled veteran? A hardened soldier? But the face that looked back at him was young. Shockingly young. Peter Parker couldn't have been much more than 20, maybe 21. His brown hair was matted with sweat, his face was pale and drawn with pain, and a nasty cut was bleeding sluggishly near his temple. But it was his eyes that struck Deku. They were kind eyes, filled with an old, weary intelligence that didn't belong on a face so young. They were the eyes of a man who had seen far too much. First things first, Peter said, his voice raw without the suit's filter. He looked at his dislocated shoulder. This needs to go back in. It's not going to be fun. He tried to use the edge of the steel table to brace himself, to pop it back in, but a sharp cry of pain escaped his lips and he slumped back, his face beaded with sweat. Let me help, Deku said, his voice quiet. He stepped forward, his own medical training, lessons learned from Recovery Girl and countless hours studying first aid, surfacing. I know how. If you'll let me. Peter looked at him, his gaze searching. He saw the genuine desperation to help in Deku's eyes, the need to atone. After a long moment, he gave a slow, tired nod. Okay, kid. Okay. Deku took a deep breath, focusing. This is going to hurt. A lot. But it will be fast. On the count of 3. He gently took hold of Peter's arm, his touch as light as he could manage. Peter squeezed his eyes shut and gritted his teeth, bracing himself. 1, 2, on 2 Deku acted. A single, swift, practiced motion, a rotation and a pull. There was a loud, wet pop that echoed in the silent kitchen, and Peter let out a raw, guttural yell that he choked back into a strangled gasp. His entire body went rigid, and then, just as quickly, slumped in relief. He let out a long, shuddering breath, his head hanging. Thanks. He managed to get out, his voice hoarse. He slowly, carefully, rotated the shoulder. You've done that before. We have a hero at my school with a healing quirk, Deku explained softly, finding a first aid kit under one of the sinks. But she can only heal by expending the person's own stamina. We learn to treat what we can conventionally first. He came back with antiseptic wipes and bandages. He paused, then gestured awkwardly at Peter's torn and bloody suit. You should take that off, so I can see the ribs. Peter hesitated for a second, then nodded. With a series of quiet clicks, the suit seemed to deflate, its high-tech fabric losing its rigidity. He painstakingly peeled the top half down to his waist, revealing his torso. Deku's breath caught. Peter's body was a roadmap of faded scars, a testament to a long and brutal career. But superimposed over the old, silvery lines was a fresh, horrifying new injury. A massive, angry bruise was already blooming across his entire left side, a violent sunset of purple, red, and deep blue. It was the exact shape of Deku's hand, the 5 points of impact from his fingers clearly visible. It was a brand. The sight of it, the physical proof of his failure, made Deku feel sick. He turned away, his shoulders shaking. I did that, he whispered. Oh God! I did that, Deku. Peter's voice was soft but firm. Izuku. Look at me. Deku slowly turned back. Peter's eyes were locked on him, weary but clear. You did what I asked you to do, he said, each word deliberate. You hit me. It worked. The Game Master bought it. You saved who knows how many people with that one shot. You didn't fail. You succeeded. This isn't success, Deku choked out, gesturing at the horrific bruise. This is monstrous. No, Peter said, his voice gaining a hard edge. Monstrous is a villain who blows up apartment buildings for fun. Monstrous is a game where the only prize is not dying. What you did, what we did, was survival. It was the only move on the board. He winced as he probed his own ribs. A few are definitely cracked. Nothing's punctured a lung, I don't think. It's not the worst I've had. The casual way he said it was more horrifying to Deku than any shout would have been. He numbly began cleaning the cut on Peter's temple, his hands working with a mechanical precision that belied the turmoil in his soul. How can you be so calm? Deku asked, his voice barely a whisper. People died. We hurt each other. And that monster is still out there, enjoying it. How are you not screaming? Peter was silent for a long time, watching Deku's careful ministrations. He looked down at the spider-shaped mask on the table, then back up. Because screaming doesn't help, he said finally, his voice heavy. And because I learned a long time ago what happens when I let my anger or my ego make my decisions. He took a deep, careful breath, wincing. You talk about your hero, All Might. The symbol of peace. A pillar. Someone who takes all the fear and bears it so no one else has to. Deku nodded, not trusting his voice. I had someone like that too, Peter said softly. My Uncle Ben. He wasn't a hero. Not in your sense. He didn't have powers. He was just a good man. The best I've ever known. He raised me. He taught me everything. He leaned back against the steel counter, his eyes distant, seeing a memory Deku couldn't. When I first got my powers, I was your age. Maybe a little younger. And I was arrogant. I was selfish. I thought they were a ticket to everything I ever wanted. Money. Popularity. I designed this suit for a wrestling match. To make a quick buck. He gestured to the mask on the table. One night, after a match, I let a robber run right past me. I could have stopped him. Easily, but I didn't. The promoter had just cheated me out of my winnings, and I was angry. I told him, I'm not a cop. That's your problem. I chose not to act. Deku listened, his hands stilled. He could hear the self-recrimination in Peter's voice, a guilt that was ancient and deeply embedded. That same robber, Peter continued, his voice thick with emotion, ran down the street and, in a panic, tried to carjack someone. The driver resisted. So the robber shot him. He looked directly at Deku, and in his eyes, Deku saw a pain so profound it was bottomless. The driver was my Uncle Ben. He was out looking for me. The confession landed in the silent kitchen with the force of a physical blow. Deku felt his own breath hitch in sympathy. My inaction, my selfish choice, it got him killed, Peter said, his voice cracking. He died because of me. Before he died, he told me, he was always telling me. With great power comes great responsibility. I didn't understand what it meant until it was too late. Until his blood was on my hands. He tapped his chest, right over his heart. So, you asked me how I can be calm? It's because I live with that every single day. Every time I put on this mask, I'm trying to pay a debt that can never be paid. Every person I save, every punch I take, it's for him. My cynicism, kid, it's not a choice. It's a scar. It's a reminder that good intentions aren't enough. That ideals can get people killed if you're not willing to see the ugly truth of the world. That's why I told you to hit me. Because I would rather take 1,000 punches than let another innocent person die because I chose not to make the hard choice. Deku stared at him, his entire perception of the cynical, wise-cracking hero shifting. He wasn't just a jaded veteran. He was a penitent. The weight he carried was just as heavy as One for All, but it wasn't a legacy of triumph. It was a legacy of failure, a burden he'd chosen to carry alone for years. Slowly, Deku finished wrapping a bandage around Peter's torso, his touch now filled with a new, profound understanding. I'm sorry, Deku said again, but this time the words had a different meaning. Not just for the punch, but for the weight Peter carried. Peter gave him a small, tired smile. It didn't quite reach his haunted eyes. Me too, kid. He nodded toward Deku. Now you. Your turn. One for all. All Might. Tell me why a kid from another dimension is willing to get thrown into the abyss to save a family he doesn't know. And so, in the quiet sanctuary of the feast kitchen, surrounded by the smell of bread and antiseptic, Deku talked. He spoke of a world where 80% of the population had powers, and the chaos that ensued. He spoke of All Might, the blonde, smiling giant who was more than a hero. He was an era of peace personified, a living deterrent who had single-handedly lowered the crime rate just by existing. He explained what it was to be quirkless in a world of powers, the years of bullying, the feeling of being less than human, and he described, with a reverence that bordered on worship, the day the symbol of peace had told him. You too can be a hero. He explained the nature of One for All. Not just a power, but a sacred trust. A torch passed from master to student through generations, a stockpiled power growing with each user, a legacy of self-sacrifice. He spoke of All Might's devastating injury, the embers of the power he held, and how he had passed that dying flame to a quirkless boy on a rooftop. He is the symbol of peace, Deku said, his voice filled with a passion that seemed to light the room. His smile was a promise. It told everyone, it's all right now. Why? Because I am here. He saved people not just with his fists, but with his presence. He took all the fear and pressure of the world onto his own shoulders so that others could feel safe. That is the kind of hero I want to be. That is the legacy I have to uphold. Using this power. He looked at his hands. To cause fear, to hurt someone on purpose. It feels like I'm spitting on his grave. It feels like I'm becoming the very thing he fought against. Peter listened intently, his expression unreadable. When Deku finished, the kitchen was silent again. So you're not just carrying a power, Peter said quietly. You're carrying a crown, a heavy one, Deku admitted. Peter nodded slowly. Great power, great responsibility, he murmured. Go beyond plus ultra. They're not so different, are they? Different words, same burden. He looked at Deku, a new, powerful understanding dawning between them. You're terrified of failing his legacy. And I'm haunted by my failure to uphold my own. In that moment, they weren't just a strategist and a symbol. They weren't Spider-Man and Deku. They were Peter and Izuku, two young men, crushed under the impossible weight of their own power, finding a mirror in the most unlikely of places. They were allies, forged not in a shared victory, but in a shared, soul-crushing ordeal. This new, fragile trust gave way to a grim necessity. The clock was still ticking. Okay, Peter said, pushing himself into a more upright position, wincing as his bandaged ribs protested. Your plan failed. My plan worked, but the cost was too high, and it's not sustainable. We can't keep beating each other into pulp until one of us is dead. The Game Master will just keep escalating. He wants us to break, Deku said, his analytical mind, now cleared of its emotional fog, beginning to fire on all cylinders. He started muttering, pacing the kitchen floor. He doesn't just want a winner. He wants a narrative. The noble hero forced to become a monster to win. It's a psychological game, not a physical one. The physical violence is just the medium. Peter watched him, a flicker of a genuine smile touching his lips. There's the brain I saw back in Times Square. Keep going, his tech is advanced. Deku continued, his words coming faster. Reality warping, pocket singularities, citywide energy fields. That's not a quirk. Not like any I've ever heard of. It has to be technology, and technology, no matter how advanced, has limits. It needs a power source. It needs a broadcast antenna. He said he was a ghost in the machine, but even a ghost has to haunt something. My thoughts exactly, Peter said. He tapped his gauntlet, and a holographic schematic of his suit's sensor suite shimmered into existence above the steel table. My suit is constantly scanning for energy signatures. Tachyons, chronotons, exotic particles, the works. When you arrived, you lit up my scanners like a Christmas tree. The energy field around the city is giving off a bizarre quantum resonance, but it's uniform, like a smooth wall. Untraceable. Because it's a barrier, Deku said, stopping his pacing to look at the hologram. It's designed to be smooth. But the explosives, the voice transmission, the holographic timer, those are active signals. They have to have a point of origin. Exactly, Peter affirmed. But if we stop fighting to look for it, he blows up a building. We're trapped in a loop, so we don't stop fighting, Deku said, a new, dangerous idea sparking in his eyes. We do both at the same time. Peter's eyebrows shot up. How? We turn our fight into the scanner, Deku explained, his hands moving as he described the concept. He wants a destructive show? We give it to him. But the destruction is targeted. It's controlled. You said my smashes were like sledgehammers. What if they're more like sonar? Or a ground-penetrating radar? Every time I unleash a shockwave, it's a burst of kinetic energy. That energy will travel, and when it interacts with his technology, the relays for his broadcast, the housing for his projection tech, it will create a feedback loop, a distortion. Your suit can be recalibrated to look for those specific distortions instead of a direct signal. Peter's eyes widened as he grasped the sheer, insane brilliance of the plan. You want to use your smashes to ping the city. And I'll act as the receiver, collecting the echo. The collateral damage isn't collateral, it's the point. We create a narrative for him. Deku elaborated, his excitement growing. Each round, we pick a new arena, and in that arena, our fight is designed to look like one of us is trying to use the environment against the other. I'll be the unstoppable force, trying to overwhelm you with raw power, smashing the area to pieces. You'll be the immovable object, using your agility to dodge and my destruction to your advantage. But in reality, every smash I throw will be a calculated scan of that sector. And every dodge you make will be you positioning yourself to get the clearest possible reading. We're weaponizing our own fight against him. Peter breathed, a look of grudging admiration on his face. We're not just putting on a play, we're embedding a secret mission inside it. He started manipulating the hologram, retasking sensor protocols. It could work. I can set the suit to filter for resonance echoes caused by Class 4 kinetic energy spikes, which is what I'd classify your smashes as. If we can get 3 or 4 good pings from different locations, we can triangulate his position. Deku finished. A grim, determined look settled on his face. But it still means, we have to fight. We have to make it look real. The loser of each round still has to lose. The energy in the room sobered instantly. Yes, Peter said quietly. He needs his pound of flesh. So we give it to him. But we control it. We plan the final blow of each round. A spectacular, but ultimately non-crippling, hit. We take turns taking the fall. We share the burden. He looked at the angry, hand-shaped bruise on his ribs, then at Deku. No more uncontrolled shots. No more rage. Every single move, from now on, is part of the plan, the strategist. He tapped his own head. And the symbol. He nodded at Deku. Working together. Deku looked at Peter, the young man bearing a lifetime of guilt, nursing cracked ribs in a shelter kitchen, but still fighting, still thinking, still refusing to break. He thought of All Might's words. A hero is someone who smashes through walls and overcomes adversity. Maybe, he thought, sometimes those walls weren't physical. Sometimes they were impossible choices, and smashing through them meant getting your hands dirty. Okay, Deku said, his voice steady for the first time since he'd arrived in this world. The despair was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp resolve. Let's choreograph. Peter offered a real, genuine smile this time. It was small, and it was tired, but it was there. Good. Because the clock is ticking. They spent the next 30 minutes hunched over the holographic display, 2 heroes from 2 worlds, planning a battle that was both a lie and their only truth. They were no longer just playing the Game Master's game. They were hijacking it. The board was set, the pieces were in motion, but now, for the first time, they were starting to write their own rules. The pre-dawn sky over Manhattan was a bruised purple, the first hint of morning struggling against the city's artificial glow. The air in the feast kitchen had grown thick with tension and the low hum of Peter's holographic interface. They had a plan. It was a desperate, razor-thin gambit that relied on perfect execution, unwavering trust, and the Game Master's own sadistic theatricality. It was all they had. The holographic timer floating in Peter's vision, a constant, private torment, clicked past the 2-hour mark since the game began. The 1-hour reprieve after their fight in Central Park was nearly over. He'll be getting antsy, Peter said, his voice a low murmur. He was leaning against the steel counter, trying to keep his weight off his injured side. He had refused to take any painkillers stronger than ibuprofen, insisting he needed his head clear and his senses sharp. The deep purple of the bruise on his torso was a stark, ugly testament to their new reality. He needs his show to continue. He'll pick the next arena any minute now. Deku was pacing again, a caged tiger in his torn green suit. The adrenaline of planning had been replaced by the gnawing anxiety of impending execution. The High Line, you think he'll choose it? They had speculated earlier. A narrow, elevated park built on a disused railway. It was the perfect stage for their new strategy. It fits his pattern, Deku muttered, his analytical mind kicking into gear to suppress the fear. Central Park was a wide-open brawl. A classic test of power. The High Line is the opposite. It's confined. It forces close-quarters combat and limits mobility, especially for someone who relies on wide-open spaces to swing. He looked at Peter. He'll see it as a way to handicap you, to force you into a direct confrontation with my strength. Peter nodded, his eyes grim. And that's our opening. It's a linear path. Long and narrow. Perfect for channeling a kinetic pulse. One good smash down the length of it, and we could get a reading on the whole Chelsea district. As if summoned by their discussion, the Game Master's voice returned. It wasn't a public boom this time, but the same intimate, chilling whisper directly into their minds. It spoke to them in their native languages, a casual, terrifying familiarity. I trust my players are rested. The audience is growing impatient. A holographic map of Manhattan shimmered into existence above the prep table, identical to the one Peter had projected. The Game Master's control was so absolute, he could even hijack their private devices. A narrow, winding green line on the west side of the island began to glow a malevolent crimson. The next stage will be the High Line, the voice purred, confirming their prediction. A delightful juxtaposition of industrial decay and urban renewal. A perfect place for one of you to be broken. Peter and Deku exchanged a look. The first part of their prediction had come true. However, the Game Master added, a new, cruel amusement in his tone. Given the spiders' distinct mobility advantage, a small handicap is in order to ensure a fair contest. On the holographic map, a small icon of a lightning bolt appeared over the High Line. For the first 5 minutes of the round, a localized, high-frequency electromagnetic pulse will be active over the arena. It should be just enough to interfere with any overly sophisticated electronics, such as, for instance, your web shooters. Peter's body went rigid. Damn it! Deku's eyes widened. This was a complication they hadn't anticipated. Peter's primary tool for mobility, defense, and attack would be gone. And to raise the stakes from our last, rather destructive, round, the Game Master continued, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. The consequences for failure will be more nautical. The map zoomed out, highlighting a ferry terminal on the Hudson River, just a few blocks from the High Line. A live, grainy video feed appeared, showing a large, white and blue commuter ferry, packed with people who had been stranded on the island, now being held at the dock under armed guard. The camera zoomed in on the faces in the crowd, scared, exhausted people huddled together for warmth. A failure to provide a satisfactory result will sink the ferry, the Game Master said simply, as if discussing the weather. I do hope your performance is compelling. The timer begins when you both reach the arena. Toodaloo. The voice, the map, and the chilling video feed vanished, leaving the two heroes in the stark silence of the kitchen. Peter let out a string of curses under his breath, his good hand clenching into a fist. He's adapting. He saw me swinging and decided to take away my wings. He's actively trying to funnel me into your power. This is bad, Deku said, the gears in his mind spinning furiously. Your entire fighting style is built around your webs. Without them, your mobility is severely limited. You'll be a grounded target. Not entirely, Peter countered, pushing himself off the counter. His face was pale, but his eyes were sharp with defiant fire. I'm not just the web's kid. I can still stick to walls. I'm still stronger and faster than any normal person. And my spider sense is still working. The EMP is high frequency. It targets the shooter's firing mechanism, not my biology. He looked at Deku. The plan still works. It just got a hell of a lot more dangerous for me. Deku's heart clenched. The risk to Peter had just magnified tenfold. He would have to rely solely on his own acrobatic skill and danger sense to evade smashes that could level buildings, without his primary tool for escape. Maybe we should change the plan, Deku suggested, his protective instincts flaring. I can be more defensive. No, Peter cut him off, his tone leaving no room for argument. We don't change the plan. We commit to it. This is exactly the kind of narrative he wants. The powerful brawler cornering the nimble fighter who's had his greatest weapon taken away. He'll be so focused on the story he's created, he won't be looking for the subtext. He's unwittingly given us the perfect cover. He gave Deku a hard, intense look. I can handle it. Can you? The question was direct. Could Deku truly unleash his power, even in a controlled way, knowing how much greater the risk to Peter was? Could he trust Peter's ability to survive it? Could he trust himself not to miscalculate? Deku thought of the faces on the ferry. He thought of the gaping hole in the apartment building. The alternative was not an option. He met Peter's gaze, his own eyes hardening with a resolve that mirrored his new friend's. Yes, good, Peter said, pulling his mask back on. His voice, now filtered and translated, was once again the confident sound of Spider-Man. Then let's not keep the psycho waiting. The High Line was an eerie, skeletal ribbon weaving between the dark buildings of Chelsea. The overgrown grasses and wildflowers that normally softened its industrial edges now looked wild and menacing in the pre-dawn gloom. The park was deserted, the ambient light from the city casting long, distorted shadows that danced like specters. A low, almost subsonic hum vibrated in the air, the EMP field. Deku landed softly on the rusted railway tracks embedded in the walkway, his boots making a dull thud. A few seconds later, Spider-Man vaulted over the railing from a fire escape on an adjacent building, landing in a low crouch. He looked different. Without the ability to swing, his movements were more terrestrial, more predatory. He was a creature of the walls now, not the sky. The moment both his feet touched the deck, the crimson timer blazed to life in the air above them, starting its inexorable countdown from 1 hour. Simultaneously, Peter tapped his web shooters. A faint fizzle and a puff of smoke was the only result. "Yup," he announced, his voice tight. "Shooters are out. 5 minutes of me being a flightless bird." The Game Master's voice washed over them. "Round 2. Begin!" This time, there was no hesitation. No feigned banter. The time for performance was over. This was a mission disguised as a fight. "Come on, symbol of peace!" Spider-Man taunted, his voice dripping with calculated venom for the Game Master's benefit. "Let's see what you've got when I can't run to the sky." He sprinted away from Deku, down the narrow walkway. His speed was still incredible, a blur of red and blue against the dark foliage. He ran not in a straight line, but weaving between benches and art installations, using the environment for cover. Deku took a deep breath, focusing his mind. This isn't a fight. It's a scan. The target is the environment. Peter is the receiver. He channeled One for All, the familiar green lightning crackling to life. 8%. He didn't charge. He stomped. St. Louis smash. He brought his foot down, not on the concrete path, but on the soft earth of a large planter box. He didn't use a full power smash, but a focused, percussive blast of air pressure directed downward. The result was spectacular. The planter exploded in a shower of dirt and foliage. The kinetic energy, with nowhere else to go, pulsed through the steel and concrete structure of the High Line itself. The entire elevated platform vibrated like a plucked guitar string. Peter, 100 feet away, didn't look back. He just tapped the side of his mask. "Got it. Faint resonance from the southeast. A possible relay. Keep going. You can't run forever!" Deku roared, playing his part. He launched himself forward, a green comet streaking down the narrow park. Peter, his spider sense surely screaming, veered sharply. He leaped onto the side of a large, glass-enclosed seating area and began to run horizontally along the panes, his feet and hands sticking to the surface with impossible ease. He was a spider in his natural habitat, moving with a fluid grace that was utterly alien. Deku didn't aim for him. He aimed for the structure Peter was on. This is a scan of the structure itself. Calibrate the force. He leaped into the air and brought his fist down in a hammering blow on the steel beam supporting the glass enclosure. Detroit smash. He held back, using only enough force to create another massive vibration, not to cause a collapse. The entire structure groaned, the steel vibrating with the kinetic pulse. The glass panes rattled in their frames but didn't break. Peter, already at the far end of the enclosure, used the momentum to launch himself across a gap to the next section of the park. "Clearer signal," he reported, his voice calm despite the immense danger. "Definitely a broadcast relay. I think it's on the roof of the Chelsea Market building. But the primary source is somewhere else. Further south. We need a stronger ping." Deku landed, kicking up dust. The choreography was working. To the Game Master, it would look like Deku was systematically destroying Spider-Man's cover, trying to trap him. The narrative was perfect. "You're just delaying the inevitable," Deku yelled. The High Line curved, passing over 14th Street. Below, the street was empty, a canyon of darkness. Peter didn't slow down. He ran to the edge of the railing, vaulted over it, and for a terrifying second, plummeted toward the street below. Deku's heart leaped into his throat. He almost broke character, almost dove after him. But then Peter's hands and feet made contact with the brick wall of the building across the street. He was running, full speed, down the side of the building. He hit the pavement, rolled, and came up sprinting, crossing the street and starting to scale the building on the other side to get back up to the park. It was an incredible display of skill and confidence. He was using the entire urban environment as his playground, even without his webs. But the game master was watching that, too, a valiant effort to escape. The villain's voice purred. But let us keep the action contained, shall we? As Peter scrambled up the wall, a section of the golden energy barrier shimmered and then descended, forming a solid, impassable wall right in his path. He was forced to drop back down to street level, trapped. Another section of the barrier dropped behind him, boxing him in on 14th Street, directly under the High Line. The game master had just created a kill box. Peter looked up at Deku, who was standing on the bridge overhead. Well? His translated voice came, laced with gallows humor. That's not ideal. Deku's mind raced. This was a deviation. A dangerous one. The plan was to use the length of the High Line to scan, but now their arena had been vertically compressed. New plan, Deku said, his voice low and urgent, hoping the game master would interpret it as a victorious taunt. I'm coming down. He leaped from the High Line, the 15-foot drop doing nothing to slow him. He landed on the street with a pavement-cracking thud that sent spiderwebs of asphalt radiating from his feet. He was now on the same level as Peter, trapped in the same box. Peter backed away slowly. This is where it gets tricky, kid. Confined space. No room for error with those shockwaves. I'll be careful, Deku promised, but his heart was hammering. Down here, a miscalculation wouldn't just send Peter flying. It could bring the High Line down on top of them. No more games, Spider-Man! Deku bellowed, charging. What followed was a terrifying, high-speed chase through the artificial canyon. Peter was a master of evasion. He used the abandoned cars as cover, vaulting over hoods and sliding under trucks. He ran up the walls to the shimmering barrier and kicked off, using the rebound to change direction unpredictably. Deku, in turn, became a force of nature. He didn't touch Peter. He didn't need to. He punched the cars Peter vaulted over, sending them tumbling end over end. He smashed the pavement where Peter had been a second before, creating craters and sending chunks of concrete flying. The street quickly became a wreck of twisted metal and shattered asphalt. It was chaos, but it was calculated chaos. Signals getting stronger! Peter yelled, flipping over a taxi as Deku's fist caved in its roof. The source is definitely south, and high up. Maybe the financial district, but it's being bounced off multiple relays. I can't get a lock. They were running out of time. The 5-minute EMP would be ending soon. And they still needed a final, powerful ping. I need you to get back on the High Line, Deku said, breathing heavily. I have an idea. A big scan. But I need you elevated to catch the reflection. How do I get up there? Peter shot back, gesturing at the smooth, impassable energy walls. I'll make you a ramp, Deku replied. He stopped, planting his feet in the center of the ruined street. He began to draw in power, more than before. The green lightning around him intensified, swirling and crackling with audible energy. 15%, 20%. Peter saw what he was doing and his lenses widened. Whoa, kid, easy! That's too much. You'll bring the whole thing down, trust me. Deku yelled back. He wasn't aiming for the High Line. He was aiming for the street in front of it. Delaware smash! He unleashed a massive, concentrated air cannon blast from his fingertips, not upward, but downward at a 45-degree angle into the asphalt. The street erupted. A huge section of pavement, conduit, and earth was blasted upward, not as shrapnel, but as a solid, angled slab. It flew up and slammed against the underside of the High Line, lodging there to form a crude, steep ramp of debris. The shockwave from the blast was immense. It pulsed through the ground, a miniature earthquake. Peter, knocked off his feet by the tremor, quickly recovered. He stared at the ramp, then back at Deku, a look of sheer disbelief in his posture. You're certifiably insane. Did it work? Deku gasped, the power usage taking its toll. Oh, it worked! Peter confirmed, his voice filled with a manic excitement. That was like a flash bang. The whole network lit up. The main signal is coming from the tallest building in the financial district, One World Trade. Top floor. It has to be, they had it. His location. But their victory was cut short. A new sound filled the air. A triumphant, electronic chime. Peter's web shooters, which had been dead, suddenly lit up with a familiar blue light. The 5-minute EMP was over, and the Game Master had seen enough. A truly inspired display of destructive creativity. The voice boomed, filled with satisfaction. And a commendable, if futile, attempt at evasion from the spider. I am satisfied. The golden barriers trapping them on the street evaporated. However, the Game Master continued. A round must have a victor. The fairy awaits its fate. You have 1 minute to provide me with a decisive conclusion. The timer in the sky, which had been ticking down from an hour, was wiped and replaced with a new one, 1 o'clock. Peter looked from his now functional web shooters to Deku. They had the information they needed, but they still had to finish the performance. They still had to pay the toll. It's my turn to take the fall, Peter said, his voice grim. The plan we made in the kitchen. Remember? Deku nodded, his heart a leaden weight. They had choreographed this moment, this specific final blow, designed to be spectacular but survivable. He took my webs away, Peter said, his voice taking on a loud, declarative tone for the Game Master's benefit. He thought it would make me weak. But he just made you overconfident. He shot a web line up to the underside of the high line, and yanked himself into the air, landing gracefully on the railing above. He was back in his element. You can smash all the concrete you want, Deku. You'll never catch me. He turned and started running along the narrow railing of the high line, a perfect balancing act. Deku knew his cue. He leaped onto the ramp of debris he had created, and then onto the high line itself. He was the unstoppable monster, closing in for the kill. There's nowhere left to run, he roared. Peter reached a section of the park with a wide, wooden sundeck area designed to look like a beach. He backflipped off the railing and landed in the center of it. End of the line, kid! Let's finish this! He was giving Deku a clear, open space. He was positioning himself for the blow. Deku charged. He channeled one for all into his leg, preparing for the kick they had practiced in theory. Manchester smash. 45% power. The force dispersed over the flat of the foot to create a wider, shallower impact. Aim for the center mass. He will use his spider sense to shift, turning a direct hit into a glancing blow that sends him flying. It will look devastating. He leaped, twisting his body into the axe kick. The green energy flared, a devastating arc of light in the dim morning. But as he was at the apex of his leap, something went wrong. A sharp, searing pain shot through his side, where a piece of shrapnel from one of the cars he'd destroyed must have caught him without him noticing. His carefully maintained focus shattered for a microsecond. His body, in a spasm of pain, twisted just a fraction of a degree too far. The angle was wrong. Peter saw it. His spider sense must have been a physical scream. He had been preparing to shift his body to the left to absorb the blow. But with Deku's altered trajectory, that shift would put him directly in the path of the kick's full force. There was no time to correct. No time to dodge. In that last, horrifying split second, Peter made a choice. He couldn't evade. So he did the only other thing he could. He fired his web shooters. Not at Deku. Not as an attack. He shot a thick, heavy glob of his impact webbing, not at Deku's descending leg, but at his own chest. The webbed ball splattered across his torso an instant before Deku's kick connected. The impact was immense. The 45% Manchester smash, instead of a glancing blow, landed squarely on Peter's chest, right on the freshly applied cushion of webbing. The sound was like a cannon going off. The web cushion absorbed the very worst of the direct kinetic impact, but the force had to go somewhere. It spread, turning the focused kick into a massive, full-body shove of unimaginable power. Peter was launched backward like a stone from a catapult. He didn't just fly. He was blasted off the high line entirely. He soared through the air, over the railing, a helpless projectile against the dark sky. He wasn't aiming for anything. He was just gone. Deku landed, his own leg screaming from the force of the kick and the pain in his side. He spun around, his eyes wide with horror, just in time to see Peter's trajectory. He was heading straight for the side of a brick apartment building across the street. "Peter!" Deku screamed, his voice raw with terror. But Peter was already reacting. Even while flying uncontrollably through the air, stunned and in agony, his instincts were perfect. His arm shot out. A single, desperate web line fired, sticking to the corner of a building just before he would have hit the brick wall. The web line went taut. It didn't stop him, it changed his trajectory. It swung him, violently, down into the dark alleyway between two buildings. There was a sickening series of crashing sounds, a dumpster, scaffolding, a fire escape, and then a final, heavy, wet thud. Then silence. The timer in the sky vanished. The Game Master's voice, dripping with ecstatic glee, echoed through the city. "Decisive! A magnificent conclusion!" The spider, outmaneuvered and ultimately swatted from his perch. "Round 2 goes to our powerhouse from another world." The voice faded, leaving Deku standing alone on the high line, his body trembling, his ears ringing. He had the Game Master's location. He had won the round. He had saved the fairy. But as he stared into the dark, silent alleyway where his friend had vanished, a cold, terrifying certainty washed over him. He had paid a price for that information, and he had no idea if it was one Peter Parker could survive.